Welcome to the OSHA Crane Operator Qualification Update conference call. My name is Christine and I will be your operator for today. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question and answer session. You can ask a question at any time by typing it into the Q&A box on your screen. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I will now turn the call over to Graham Brent and Tom Sicklesteel. You may begin.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Graham Brent, and I'm the CEO of NCCCO, the National Commission for the Certification of Crane Operators. NCCCO has been in operation since 1995, when it was set up as a grassroots initiative to create safety programs for individuals that operate cranes, and has since evolved into an organization that has around 27 different certification programs and has certified over 100,000 individuals. And my co-presenter today is Tom Sicklesteel.
Hi, I'm Tom Sicklesteel. I'm the General Manager of Levitt Cranes USA, and my role in a lot of the OSHA and ASME has been, I'm a voting member on ASME B30.5. I am also an alternate on ASME B30, which set the industry safety standards for cranes and attachments and those sort of things. Also served on OSHA review of OSHA's rules and provided comments, and have looked forward to the opportunity to present to you today. Graham?
Thank you, Tom. Well, we're very excited about this subject today, and it's, as we said in our subtext of our title of this presentation, it has indeed been a long-awaited final rule on this particular subject. One of the things that NCCCO has endeavored to do since its inception is to track both state and federal regulation and licensing development, and so this has been a rule dear to our hearts, really for our entire existence. So it's very good to see that we now have total clarity on what OSHA intends with respect to this, and our mission here in the next 58 minutes is to present that to you. We're going to allow some time for questions at the end, and as I think has already been indicated, if you type those in, we get to see those, and we'll do our very best to follow up with those during the course of the presentation. First of all, we have to say that we are not OSHA. This information is being presented as a public service, and the sole authority for everything that we're really going to be talking about today is indeed OSHA itself. And so those are the OSHA rules that are in place. We have done our very best wherever we've, if you will, quote-unquote, interpreted OSHA, to have used OSHA's words itself as exemplified in letters of interpretation, the rules themselves, or the preambles to those rules. Let's just take a look at the general overview here. What exactly are we talking about? And the actual rule itself is known as 29 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations 1926, and it's subpart CC, which replaces the old subpart N, and it's specifically focused on construction crane operations. And I'm sure, as most of us know, there are other types of OSHA regulations, particularly general industry, which this does not cover. And so part of the disentanglement we have to go through sometimes is to determine what is and is not construction crane operations. There are some specific inclusions and exclusions in the specified scope of this rule, and you see some of them there. And those with asterisks is where it kind of gets a little thorny from time to time, depending on the actual application of the cranes themselves. So we need to take a look at that, and we'll be trying to do some of that during the course of this presentation. So just to put everything in context here, the specific section really we're talking about is 1926-1427, which is titled Operator Qualifications. And you see the rest of the rule there that was published in 2010 has been in effect pretty much since that date. So really all we've been waiting for is some clarity from OSHA as to what they really intend for the qualification process. It has indeed been a long road, and it's actually 27 years since OSHA first indicated its interest in developing a rule of this type. Why do we need qualifications of crane operators? Well, I would hope that most of us listening today would not need this question to be answered. This is a safety initiative. We're talking about reducing accidents, saving lives, and so forth. And we have data to support the fact that certification as a component of qualification can in fact do that. We've seen data from going all the way back to the late 70s in Canada and the province of Ontario. We saw that corroborated in 2008 with a study that OSHA conducted in California, and a study that's ongoing by forensic engineers, Hague Engineering, is also providing some fascinating insight into the causes of crane accidents and the contribution that operator certification can make in reducing those. So OSHA's own estimate you see there is that annually they anticipate an average of 22 fatalities to be removed and over 170 injuries. Over and above that, which is of course the most important objective of this, is financial savings, liability insurance costs, and all the other savings that go around with not having projects interrupted and interruptions of business. As I said, this has been a long road that we've been down, and really it took up until very recently to get this clarity that we now see from OSHA. And although the original rule was published in 2010, we were still talking about it 8 years later. The principal reason for that was there were two issues that the industry had a real problem with in the final rule that was not evident from the provisional rule that was all reviewed and public comment was provided on. Those two issues fundamentally are summed up in this slide. In paragraph, what was the old paragraph B2, it's no longer this reference, but if you look at the original rule that was published in 2010, you would see it noted there. And it stated that if an operator was certified, then he was deemed qualified to operate a particular piece of equipment. In other words, you actually, once you were certified, that was it. That's all you needed. That's all the employer needed. That's all the employee needed. And there was really nothing more that the employer needed to do other than to look at a certification card. That was a problem because that had never been the way that certification had been positioned by the certification bodies, nor was it indeed the intent of the committee that put this rule together back in 2002 and 3, the so-called Cranes and Derricks Advisory Committee, or CDAC. Their intent was certainly not that certification was the be-all and end-all, and they never intended to relieve the employer of subsequent review and oversight of the certified operator. And then the second part was that OSHA intended in this final rule that certification should not only be by the type of crane, but also by the capacity of the crane. And that was a real problem because, again, that had never been the original intent. When you look at the actual impact that would have, certainly would have immense fiscal impact on the employers or the employee if at that time they were paying for the certification. There was the concept that there may be very many different layers of certification then required, which frankly from a testing perspective weren't necessary. In the certification world, you only test when you need to test. And if there's no change in skill set or knowledge area, then there's really no justification for layering on different exams, additional exams. So that was problematic from several different areas. And then, as we've discussed, the deemed qualified by virtue of certification is a misrepresentation of the role of certification. We've always said that certification was a tool in the toolbox, a very valuable tool, but only one tool of many, and that the employer was still responsible for those others, such as reviewing experience requirements or making sure that a certified operator was familiar with a particular manufacturer or make of crane, or the operational characteristics, or even the contacts of the crane, attachments and so forth. So there's a whole variety of things that certification cannot do and was never designed to do. It's true to say that this probably wouldn't have occurred without the industry coming together, and Those of you familiar with the way the primary crane user organizations operate will know that that's a pretty significant coalition that was put together from all sides of the aisle, union, non-union, user, manufacturer, distributor, and so forth, that collaborated in moving OSHA off point on this issue and getting some serious attention. So just to complete our history here, this basically is the last 12 months or so of history around the rule. We saw the original date of, I would say the original extended date of certification requirement came into effect on November 10th. And then a new component, which we're going to talk about extensively in this presentation, by February the 7th, all those crane operators had to be evaluated. And then OSHA provided a little bit of a grace period, although they didn't actually call it that, up until April the 15th, when those evaluations had to be documented. So bottom line here is that everything that OSHA has published is now in effect, and so everything we're going to talk about is something that you need to ensure that you're in compliance with. So just to summarize here, the primary changes from what we saw back in 2010 is that capacity has been removed as a requirement for certification. There's a new employer evaluation process that's been added. Because we have evaluation, we have to have people to do those evaluations, and those are called evaluators, and we have requirements for them. And then we also have a category that was addressed in the original rule but has now been shaped up a little bit for those who are not yet certified or completely qualified but are considered to be operators in training. And so those operators in training also have to be observed by individuals called in the rule trainers. If you were a mathematician and you wanted to look at this three-step process, which OSHA now calls this, that mathematical formula would look something like this. You would take training, which is a necessary requirement. It's always been the case, but that also has been sharpened up a little bit in focus in the new rule. You would add to training certification, which we're all familiar with in concept, but we will talk about as we go through. And then the final and third component is evaluation. And once all those three elements are in place, then you end up with qualification. That's the end goal of this whole process that OSHA requires that employers ensure their employees meet. So that's our introduction. And we're going to start now by taking a closer look at training. And for that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Tom Sicklestill.
Thank you, Graham. So for training, that's really the first step, as Graham outlined. That is the where everything all starts, and that's how we get the ball rolling. So let's roll into what OSHA is requiring for that. So the goal that they wanted is through a formal and practical instruction, and they focused on a couple areas. They used the phrase recognize and avert risk. And the reason that that's important is that determines both the type of equipment as well as the job type, were the two areas that they divided this into, the training. And so we're going to specifically talk about these areas a little bit more, but OSHA has a very specific list on the training content that's required. It's listed on there. And retraining is training is not a one-time event. If you have an operator that may fail an evaluation or may be involved in an incident, then they'll need to go back through training or any other performance indicator. They may have to go back through training in order to do that. So who's responsible for the duty to train is truly the employer. OSHA says that it's an ongoing responsibility of the employer to do that, and especially as the experience need to expand, both in the type of job as well as the type of equipment and that sort of thing, and it extends beyond when the individual is, once they're certified and evaluated, you continue to train them as machines continue to develop and grow and those sort of things. So the training areas that we outlined, the way to go into there is you can go into OSHA. It's the 1926-1427J1 and 2. There's an Appendix C, and there's a long list of all kinds of training areas. It includes the machine type, it includes controls, it includes job types, it includes all of those different elements. Areas that might, if they change, would really impact the operator, and they would need to understand those areas. And so OSHA's outlined those specific training areas. Before they didn't have as much detail, and so it's been nice of them to actually added that element. The next part is related to how does training occur and who can train and those sort of items. So it's important to note that training is two parts. So it's based on the equipment, but it's also based on the tasks. And so you might have an operator who's fully certified and evaluated on a piece of equipment, but they can be an operator in training with different equipment or different tasks that they may have different skills that they require to do that. And so just because an operator is certified and evaluated doesn't mean that they're never an operator in training. There truly needs to be a tracking of where is their knowledge base and where may they not have that information in training. And so that's really important to be able to discern as we go forward. So the next thing is there are certain tasks and the structure of how do we, what does training mean? Well, training means that they need to have supervision. They need to have someone watching them and helping teach them the situation and about the equipment or whatever training is required, whatever element that may be. So someone who's not certified and evaluated are definitely an operator in training, but as I previously said, you could be certified and evaluated but have still maybe not some skills and experience and training related to a specific type. So all of those kinds of things need to come into play. As Graham mentioned, it's truly that formula. So this is the first step. Now there are certain tasks that they said, that OSHA said, you can not do these tasks unless you are certified and evaluated, but you also you need to be certified in order to perform just these tasks. And the first one is personnel hoisting, and the next is operation near energized power lines, multiple crane lifts, or working over a shaft or cofferdam. So what OSHA has said with that is you need to be certified in order to do that, even though you may be an operator in training. The reason they wanted that is because they're what we typically call critical type lifts, and they realized that they needed to be able to do training for critical lifts, but they didn't want just someone who had never been certified to perform that lift. So they've restricted those individuals from learning how to do critical lifts. So that's kind of how the evaluations have to occur. The next part is who does the training. So the key phrase that they added was employee or an agent. The trainer must be an employee or agent of the employer. Well, so the reason they use the phrase agent is that is truly a contractual relationship. That could be, for example, maybe a crane is purchased and the manufacturer comes out with a service technician. In that case, that's an agent that comes out. Or maybe it's the union hall provides some training on the equipment. That's an agent if we're a unionized employer. Maybe it's an operator who's retired who doesn't have a certification anymore. That would be an agent as well. And so they really tried to open the bandwidth of who could provide this training into all possible scenarios. And they said, listen, the important thing is that this trainer has the knowledge, training, and experience to help teach the direct operators in training and direct the operators in training on that equipment. So the other parts of this is they can't have any other tasks. They must be able to communicate, and they must be continuous monitoring. You can have the short break here and there, but it's really truly a one-on-one training experience that has to occur. Step 2, we move on over into certification. And so for that, I'll hand that back to my colleague Graham.
Thanks, Tom. Well, compared with training and compared with what we're going to be talking about a little bit later on, evaluation, there's relatively little change other than what we've already discussed, but it's certainly worth taking a look at it. First of all, certification can only be done by an accredited crane operator testing organization, or as we'll see later, an employer program. Looking at this one first, though, what does that mean in practice? Well, there are currently 4 accredited certification bodies that we list them there, and NCCCO is the oldest and the largest, of course, but there are others with specific focus, I would say. Now, this can change over time, and so what we always encourage people to do is at any one point in time, if you're concerned or about the status of a certification body or considering to have your individuals certified, go to the websites of either one or both of the 2 accrediting agencies. Every certification body that's accredited has to be accredited either by ANSI or by NCCA, which is the National Commission for Certifying Agencies. And those websites contain up-to-the-minute status of all of those bodies. So there may be one or more certification bodies not on this list today that you might consider to ought to be there. And I can only say go to these websites and you will determine exactly what the status is. Like I said, the second option is through an employer program, and so employers are given that option. You can develop your own program, but it's held to the same standards that the accredited crane operator testing organization is. In fact, that same organization is still involved in the employer program because it has to not only be by equipment type, just as like the regular certification is, but it must also follow the same process such that it's audited by a certification body. So it's really it's the same goal, though it can be reached by different avenues. As we've said, capacity is now out, and in fact OSHA even proposed removing capacity completely on the basis that there were no safety benefits revealed from any source. They didn't believe they had any, so in the proposed rule to this last final rule, they asked the question, should in fact anybody have any information, data that they didn't have, please send it in. They got none. And so what they said was not only is there no safety benefit, but there's a huge financial saving from not having capacity involved any longer in that certification process. And you can see that these are quotes taken directly out of OSHA's preamble. The one-time cost savings of over $25 million and an annual saving of almost $500,000. So this is a tremendous saving for the industry because, as we'll see in a couple of minutes here, that cost primarily falls at the feet of the employer. Moving on, remaining key facts, straight out of the rule itself, those tests, the certification by extension must cover specific knowledge and specific skills. Those are laid out in the rule. The specific knowledge, not surprisingly, is the same specific knowledge that Tom has already talked about with respect to training. So we have coordination of the training content areas and then the certification content areas, which really only makes sense. Certification is valid for 5 years, and then there is a recertification process required, which in the case of all 5 certification bodies that are currently accredited, is by exam of some sort. It's either a practical exam and a written exam, or just a written exam, a shorter written exam in some cases. In some cases, there's a waiver of the practical exam if you can show a certain amount of time of crane-related experience during the 5-year period. A couple of other important points. The certification is portable, which means that it's actually owned legally by the certificant, by the individual that's been certified. Notwithstanding the fact that OSHA is now very clear that the employer has to pay for the certification. So the employer is already paying for the training. The employer now needs to pay for the certification. However, the question, anticipating the question, I suppose, what happens if I have an employee that just keeps taking the test and cannot seem to pass? OSHA says the employer is not required to continue employing that individual if there really seems to be no chance of success on it. So like I say, not too many changes. Certification is still a central component of the qualification process. It's now considered to be step 2, like we've said, and this is OSHA's own language. And the third step, and possibly the one that's going to be of most interest, because it is new in the way that's presented by OSHA, is evaluation. And for that, I'm going to turn things back over to Tom.
Great, thank you, Graham. So as Graham indicated, evaluation is the kind of the latest and greatest element. OSHA was really thankful for OSHA to address the issue of evaluation, but it is definitely a different thing than what the industry's been doing, and so we want to walk through that in detail. So the evaluation objective, as you can see, is there's a couple of elements. One is the safety devices, operational aids, software, size, and configuration of the crane. So I'm going to call that the equipment element. And there's also the type of work, blind lifts, personnel lifting, multiple crane lifts. And so it has the same requirement as the training, knowledge, skills, and ability to recognize and avert risk and operate equipment safely. So again, it branches that down into these 2 categories. And so the reason that this becomes important is because our evaluations will now shape everything in the same context. So training and evaluation are very much aligned. So what triggers new evaluations? So the rule, what was nice what OSHA did is initially they said almost every single different configuration that the crane could go into, it had to be evaluated. And they said, well, okay, wait a minute, we understand that maybe if you can run a crane and you add just one section of boom or you change something pretty minor on it, there shouldn't be a brand new evaluation. And so what OSHA said is the employers can decide if additional evaluations are required, and they're only required when the operator's existing skills, knowledge, or ability to identify and avert risk are not sufficient for that operator to operate the equipment, a new model, configuration, that sort of thing. So what that really means is if I have a crane and it's a make and model and all of the controls, boom systems, and processes are the same between another model, maybe I can make the determination that I don't have to have an evaluation on that. But if I do have things that change, require additional knowledge or different knowledge or ability, then I'm going to have those additional evaluations. So it truly left that up to the employer. So new evaluator qualifications, who is the evaluator? And very similar to the trainer, they said an evaluator is an employee or agent of the employer. So on multiple employer sites, sometimes they share cranes and that sort of thing. So it's whoever is employing the operator. And what that means is we first OSHA typically starts with who's paying the operator. And therefore, that's who has to have the evaluator. So could be example, and we list examples of former crane operator, that sort of stuff. So they did not get really restrictive as to who the evaluator had to be. It didn't have to be another certified operator, but it should be taken into account that they understand the crane, they understand how to evaluate, they understand how to assess equipment operators. It's not the same as necessarily the same knowledge to actually perform the work, and it's not necessarily a qualified person, but it is definitely someone who evaluates operators can evaluate those kind of things. So they left it kind of open on that regard, which was helpful to include those former crane operators or other individuals. So the evaluation provisions. So one of the things that operators employed prior to December 10th, any previous assessments that were done on them, OSHA was like, we don't want you to go necessarily create all these brand new evaluations.